to GWP Weekly Recap. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined once again by co-host Jacob Fulmer. And our top stories tonight, we'll be looking at the recent State of the Union address, some more developments on the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping, and Hurricane Melissa revelation. All that and much more coming your way on GWP Weekly Recap. So, Jake, as you know, of course, this past week we had the State of the Union given by President Trump. And again, a number of major things there. I don't know what your main takeaways were, Jake. One major thing noticed, of course, was the Olympics, which we covered extensively here on GWP. Well, the Olympic gold medal winning men's hockey team was recognized. They were honored at the State of the Union. That was just one of the things. Were there any big takeaways that you had from the State of the Union address, Jake?
Yes, well, I think it was interesting that it was the longest in U.S. history. So that was definitely something notable about it. And then additionally, on top of that, we also had some interruptions, some controversies, even some outbursts, and even a removal from the State of the Union address.
Yes, yes. Important points to make there. We noticed that, of course, some interruptions during the State of the Union. Again, not the most professional behavior from all parties. So, yes, that's certainly worth noting. Again, also at the State of the Union, a number of different honors given. Of course, we mentioned the United States Olympic team, the gold medal winning men's hockey team. So that was a major thing. They were recognized there. And Jake, as you mentioned, it's been some time since our men's hockey team has done that well in the Olympics, hasn't it?
Yes, that hasn't happened since 1980 Winter Olympics.
Absolutely. So that one of the
The
honors
miracle on
being,
ice.
yes, the Miracle on Ice. So that, of course, one of the honors being given there. Of course, a couple of World War II veterans there also recognized. So Jake, I don't know if you've had the honor of knowing any World War II veterans. I've met, I think, only one. And again, that was at a very young age. Very few of them today are still living, and it's sort of amazing to think these guys again were honored at the State of the Union. Both of them 100 years old, again served in World War II, and it's just amazing to think that they're still alive, isn't it?
Yes, considering that war did take place over 8 decades ago, it certainly is, and it certainly you can get a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom from people who've been around for such time and went through such events. And obviously, the world has changed quite a bit since that World War took place over 80 years ago.
It has certainly. They've got a lot of insight on the topic. So that, of course, being one of the honors, of course, on the unfortunate end, a number of tragedies that happened along the course of the past year. So again, people recognized, sort of memorialized for that. Of course, this past year, which we covered extensively on the Great World Podcast, we also on GWP News Weekly, we covered the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And so his widow, Erica Kirk, was recognized at the State of the Union. Also, a story which we didn't cover as extensively on GWP News was a Ukrainian lady in North Carolina who was sadly murdered on a train, and her parents were recognized, were honored at the State of the Union. Again, very tragic circumstances that led up to it. Um, Again, but important things to note on that front, Jake. Any other major takeaways that you had from the State of the Union address?
Well, again, just the fact that it was so much longer than any previous State of the Union addresses that we've had. If we go back in time, so it's the longest in modern day history. That is certainly what we do know about it. The last address that he gave was actually the second longest in modern day history at 99 and a half minutes. If we go back to some of the other longer ones that we had, Bill Clinton had a speech of about 88 minutes as well, but the majority of the State of the Union addresses have been anywhere from about 40 to 60 minutes. So certainly unusual to have one that lasted almost 2 hours something that the president did promise ahead of his address.
That it would be the longest. Well, I did not know that. He actually promised beforehand that it would be the longest.
No, I promised that it would be a long speech, not
That it would be
necessarily
a
the
long
longest.
one, not necessarily the longest. Didn't know he'd be breaking a record. Well, that is quite interesting to know. I wasn't sure exactly on average how long, again, in the grand scheme of things, how long they are. So very interesting, longest one ever on record. And so, of
Well,
course, this
I
was
guess
the yes.
a slight correction. So they've only been keeping track of the links of these speeches since 1964. So this is according to the American Presidency Project, which has been keeping track of these speech links since 1964. So it is the longest speech before a joint session of Congress within the last 60 years at an hour and 48 minutes. So it is possible that before 1964 there was a longer speech, but it's not documented.
Absolutely, longest on record. Certainly worth mentioning there. That's just since 1964, though, as long as we've been recording that. So it's possible that a longer one has happened, but not to our knowledge. So, again, in any case, it was certainly above average in terms of how long it was, how long it took. And it is certainly worth noting. Of course, this was the State of the Union address. It happened just this past week. Again, the technical State of the Union address of President Trump's second term. He, of course, early in his presidency, gave a joint address, an address to the joint houses of Congress, but again, was very early on, wasn't really considered a State of the Union address. Again, somewhat resembled it, but technically was not. If you'll recall, we may have covered that earlier in the year. Jake?
Yes, so certainly some other information worth mentioning on that front. And so that pretty much wraps things up with the State of the Union address. That leads us into our next top story involving the investigation into the kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie. Isaac, what are some of the new details that we have on that case?
Yes, Jake, great question. We've had a few new recent developments on the situation with the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping, which we've been following fairly extensively here on GWP News, certainly on GWP News Weekly, and we've touched on it, of course, here on GWP Recap as well, I believe, in the past. Now, in terms of those recent developments, what they are, well, Savannah Guthrie's new plea is said to have revealed a potentially major detail. Again, there's a lot of back and forth on this as to what exactly this part means, but she recently put out a statement where she said it's day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. So again, of course, very tragic, and it's just difficult to think how long it has been. Again, with each day that passes, it's less and less likely, exceedingly unlikely at this point, that her mother is still living. Of course, given her advanced age, again, already certain underlying health factors. Again, of course, we know that she relied on certain medications, on a pacemaker. We know that pacemaker disconnected from her phone, so that's not a good sign. And it's, again, very unlikely that she's been given the medication that she needs. So, again, very tragic. And it's been 24 days. Now, there has been some controversy about this recent statement that she made that it's been 24 days since then. Again, some commentators recently have noted that this level of specificity hadn't previously been publicly stated, suggesting that Savannah Guthrie might know more about the exact circumstances of the abduction than investigators have previously confirmed. So, again, we've heard a number of theories, and the sheriff's department in the area has just been overwhelmed with the amount of tips they've received. And we'll get to the exact numbers on that in just a few moments on how many tips exactly they've received. But there have been a lot, and it's taken a lot of work, a lot of time and effort to sort through those different tips, and a lot of them, unfortunately, have turned out to be hoaxes. Again, we already know one arrest in connection with this, not in connection with the kidnapping, but in connection with a hoax related to one of the ransom notes. Of course, not long ago, a person was arrested in Los Angeles in connection with one of these ransom notes, one of these extortion notes that turned out not to be actually connected with the kidnapping. Again, just someone trying to take advantage of the situation and make some extra money off of it. So, again, still very much an ongoing investigation, and not a great deal is known. But again, Jake, tell me what your gut says on this. Again, day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. That statement recently from Savannah Guthrie, daughter of Nancy Guthrie, who was recently kidnapped. And again, there are folks, some skeptics out there who are suspicious about this because the exact length of time it had been since she had been kidnapped hadn't been publicly stated. So again, some are forming theories on that basis. Again, considering this somewhat suspicious. Any thoughts?
Well, I guess the first thing that I think is interesting about that is I will say something that's been very odd in this investigation is the fact that there's been really, I think it's shocking in the sense that because of all the cryptocurrency
Uh,
demands that there's been, I think it's kind of interesting that some are suggesting that this is all just a money grab and that this whole thing has just been staged and everything. I don't think there's any way that that's possible for one reason in particular, besides some of the obvious reasons. But I think the money, I think the family would not be offering to give the person money if they turn themselves in. I don't think that would be happening if their goal was to receive money themselves out of this. And so it doesn't really seem like that's what their goal is in all of this. Something else that's interesting is that, you could say that Savannah Guthrie possible possibly is somehow tied to this investigation because she mentioned how many days it's been, but there's been many news articles that have said it's a day XX amount of days, and so there's many news articles that have said that. And so if anything, you could say that reporters who've made suggestions like that could also be responsible if you want to play that game. And so I think we're just going into really high speculation, is where I think people are kind of taking this case into.
that's a great question or a great point, Jake. We've talked about that pretty extensively on the past across GWP News Weekly, certainly even on the Great World podcast. We've talked about again these stories that tend to make for big headlines that tend to sell well in terms of headlines and different things tend to be the very controversial ones. And again, this is sort of framed here again when we hear that this has never been publicly stated before. Again, it uses very a very strong definite language, right? It's never been publicly stated before. Well, sure, maybe it hasn't, but at the same time, again, and initially I might say well, perhaps it never has been publicly stated before, but would it be all that difficult that it's been about 24 days since Nancy Guthrie was kidnapped? I don't think so, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously the footage, the discovery that she was no longer there on Sunday. Of course, there's still a lot of speculation about that because she was now no longer attending in-person services for church on Sunday. But I mean, either way you look at it, I mean, we have a pretty good idea of when Nancy Guthrie disappeared. That's not really secret information that Savannah knows secretly. That wasn't like
Right.
that didn't reveal that she knew more than she's letting on. That's pretty much public knowledge at this point in time. So such speculation is quite, I would say, wild, I would say at this point.
Right. And contrary to, again, some of what the press would suggest on some of these recent statements from Savannah Guthrie, it seems fairly tame, actually. Again, fairly general statements. But again, that's not to stop the press from at least attempting to turn it into controversy. And so again, a note here, again, another part of that remark. Again, she says, 24 days since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. Again, this is something. It would be fairly easy to say that it's a generalization, a general assessment, given at the time that it took place. Again, probably, probably her mother was in bed at the time, but again, that's part of again attention being drawn to this in light of controversy and different things saying, oh, well, authorities have not actually publicly confirmed that Nancy was taken directly from her bed, but Savannah's phrasing has become a major talking point. So, again, it sounds more likely that this was a generalization. It's likely that that's what happened. Again, in the grand scheme of things, is that a significant detail or not? Again, we haven't had confirmation on that from authorities, but again, nonetheless, it is an ongoing investigation. So, another recent development on that, investigators have now been focusing on more DNA evidence on gloves and a septic tank search in the neighborhood. So, some new DNA evidence, as we said, is under analysis. This part of this DNA evidence comes from a septic tank search near the home. Multiple gloves also have been recovered in the area, which include a pair found by a local couple with what appeared to be blood and tearing consistent with a struggle, again, such as the crime, the kidnapping that allegedly occurred. So those gloves are currently being processed, and the DNA is expected to be uploaded to the online database we previously talked about, CODIS, CODIS. So it'll be interesting to see developments on that, whose DNA that turns out to be on those gloves, notably. Not a whole lot of details on the DNA search from the septic tank. Again, the gloves presumably being more fresh evidence. In terms of that. By the sound of it, that would be more promising DNA evidence than the other sample. Any thoughts on that, Jake, on the DNA evidence here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, that we have just more sampling, but at the same point in time, it really just has not led any closer to catching a suspect. I mean, hopefully at some point in time it will, or, hopefully some DNA will lead us towards or lead the investigation rather towards a suspect and figure that out. And of
That was
course,
a
we'll
great.
continue to update you as we go throughout the rest of this case here on GWP Weekly News, as well as the weekly recap. And so now we'll go ahead and we'll finish things out with our last two quick news stories that we're going to hit on. The first one was something else that we've been following very closely. NASA's Artemis 2 launch that continues to be delayed. So there's a couple of different reasons why that's been delayed. There was a helium pressure issue in the upper stage, and there's also there was previously a liquid hydrogen leak as well. And so there's been a couple of different things. The wet dress rehearsal back on February 2nd discovered that hydrogen leak. And then now this pressure issue has also been found. So the original delay was supposed to be delayed into the month of March, but now that there's been additional pressure delays, that means that it's now been delayed into April. The earliest Artemis 2 would launch is going to be April 1st of this year. So April 1st is the earliest, but it looks to be more likely middle to late April, possibly even beyond that.
That about covers our recent events. Up next is weather.
So now we'll move into weather. First, looking at some of the national weather alerts that we've got across the country. We've got red flag warnings out here across the state of Missouri, as we do have a fire risk for today. We've also got some strong winds that we're going to be experiencing today. High wind warnings, gusts up to 60 miles per hour possible across North Dakota and Minnesota. And then we do have a winter weather advisory for some snow that we're going to be experiencing tomorrow across South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And then a cold front is going to move through tomorrow night, that's going to drop off temperatures, and then that could even result in a wintry mix on Sunday afternoon. More details on that shortly. Until then, we do have the elevated fire conditions as shown from the weather story from the Kansas City and Pleasant Hill National Weather Service office, showing those stronger winds and low humidity values that we will be experiencing through the afternoon hours. And that is part of the reason why we do have that fire risk here across the state of Missouri. The good news is that from the SPC, we are not outlined for that fire weather risk. So that is good. But there is an elevated fire risk today across New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming, as a little bit of a stronger fire risk across that region. So now let's move into that regional forecast. Now that we've looked at an overview of everything that's going on right now, we'll start out west. This is from the GFS models morning forecast run. That's what we're looking at here on Tropical Tidbits. That's where we're looking at this model run. So things staying dry for over the next couple of days out west. Then we do have a few showers as we go into your Sunday out west from a weak storm system, and then additional chances for rain and snow as we go into Monday and Tuesday. So things picking up a little bit more across this region. How much snowfall are we expecting over the next 7 days out west? We're expecting in the higher elevations a couple of feet of snow. Colorado Rockies finally getting involved in some of the snowfall. Limited accumulation is expected for the Sierra ski resorts, which have been, well, we've seen a little bit less snowfall than what we typically get here in the state of California. As far as rainfall amounts, looks like a couple of inches could fall mainly along the west coast here from Northern California up to the state of Washington. In the more localized region here across the northern and central region of the U.S., again, as we mentioned, we have a weak system that's going to be bringing some snowfall as we go into the daytime hours tomorrow. About 1 to 3 inches of accumulation is expected. Isolated higher totals is going to be possible from North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So that's going to be during the daytime hours tomorrow. We could see a little bit of moisture move in here across the state of Missouri. A couple of stray thunderstorms are going to be possible, but the risk is very low of that taking place. Then on Sunday, things get very interesting as a storm system is going to move into the state of Kansas and Missouri, bringing in the chance for some rain, ice, and even the potential for some accumulating snowfall, mainly north of Interstate 70. Now, there is still a little bit of uncertainty as we are still a couple of days out. The details on it are becoming a little bit more clear. It appears that we will be looking at accumulating snow in northern Missouri, mostly rain across the central and southern part of Missouri. And so that takes us into our snowfall forecast. Of course, this is how much snow that we've had in the local region, about 7 inches in Nevada, about 8.5 here in Columbia. So what is our snowfall forecast going into Sunday? Again, the majority of the snow is going to be north of Interstate 70. Around Interstate 70 itself, we're looking at about less than half an inch of snowfall. It is possible that this area does not see any snowfall. So it just depends on where that rain snow line is going to set up. It's all going to be dependent on our temperatures Sunday evening, which are going to be hovering in the mid to upper 30s, possibly low 40s. So that's going to make all the difference in how much accumulation that we get. But at this point in time, south of Interstate 70, including here in Columbia, I am expecting about a dusting to possibly upwards of a half an inch of accumulation. North of Interstate 70, about an inch to 2 or 3 inches of accumulation is going to be possible. What about ice? Ice is very unlikely at this point in time. A little bit of freezing rain, maybe a little bit of sleet could mix in. So a light glaze, a very, very, very light glaze is possible. We're talking about maybe 500ths of an inch of ice. So not a whole lot of ice, but it still could cause a few travel disruptions Sunday night into Monday morning, although the majority of this will not stick to the roadway, so that will help us out here across the state of Missouri. So that was our look at our snowfall totals. What about rainfall totals? After Sunday, we are going to be, in fact, let's actually Let's go back to that here. So that's on Sunday and Monday. That's going to clear out. And then as we go throughout next week, we are going to be experiencing rounds and rounds of rainfall. Temperatures will be warm enough to where all of this is going to be rain after Sunday's storm system. And so we could be looking at some very heavy amounts of rainfall here across the state of Missouri, maybe even a little bit of flooding here. As far as how much rainfall we can expect, around 2, maybe 3 inches of rainfall is forecasted over the next 7 days across the state of Missouri. Now we'll look at the Northeast, the regional forecast. Of course, we had that blizzard on Sunday and Monday where we had 38 inches or almost 38 inches of snowfall in Providence, Rhode Island. That set the record for the most snowfall that we've ever seen in one 24-hour period across the state of Rhode Island. So a state snowfall record was set from that blizzard that we saw on Sunday and Monday. Luckily clearing out over the next couple of days, but then as we go into Sunday, we are expecting that same storm system that's going to bring the snow across the northern plains. That same system is going to move in on Sunday, bringing in light accumulations across Pennsylvania, New York, as well as into Vermont and New Hampshire, likely staying all rain across New York City. Boston could get in on a little bit of this snowfall as we go into Sunday, even though we're still digging out from that previous blizzard that we mentioned. Then we're going to be watching another storm system as we go into Monday and Tuesday. This is something we really need to watch because at this point in time, there is a possibility that early next week across the Northeast that we could be looking at an ice storm. So that is something that we will definitely pay close attention to. So now we'll go ahead and we'll go into that temperature outlook over the next several days here. So again, staying mostly above average, 5, 10, 15 degrees above average across the majority of the country as we go into this weekend. By Sunday, a little bit of a cool down across the northern plains, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast is expected. Some of that cooler air will make its way here into the state of Missouri, but that cooler air this weekend is not going to last long as we are expecting temperatures to be anywhere from about 5 to 15 degrees above average across the majority of the country as we go into next week. And so we'll notice that from the Weather Prediction Center, NOAA, they're putting out their 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, showing that temperatures will likely be above average for the entire lower 48. So again, staying above average from March 4th through the 8th. Precipitation will also likely stay above average. And you'll notice that hazardous outlook from NOAA also showing that there's a high risk of heavy precipitation that could lead to flooding. So that will be the big story as we go into next week. Now we'll move into sports. All right, so now we're going to move into the sports report. Of course, now we are just less than a couple of weeks away from the end of the regular season in men's and women's college basketball. So we're going to be looking at some of the different games and different scores that we have seen this week, as well as some of the upcoming games that we have going into this weekend, as well as into next week. So let's go ahead and kind of recap some of those games. We'll start with women's basketball. We had Baylor defeating Kansas State 80 to 54. So Baylor is now ranked number 18. Kansas State is unranked, so that was a pretty big win. And then Georgia won against Auburn 74 to 52 on Monday. So those were some of our scores on Monday, but we had a really big matchup between number 8 Michigan and number 13 Ohio State. Of course, that's a really big football rivalry, but at least here in women's basketball, Michigan defeating Ohio State 88 to 86. That game went into overtime. So that top 15 ranked matchup went into overtime. Michigan pulling off the victory 88 to 86, defeating their rival Ohio State. Yesterday, we also had several big games. Florida defeated ranked 19 Ole Miss 74 to 67. So that was kind of an upset that we had yesterday. Number 5 Vanderbilt defeated Alabama, who's ranked number 24. The final score in that game was 85 75 to 60. We also had a ranked matchup between number 23 Georgia, number 4 Texas. Texas had a pretty impressive victory in that game. 79 to 50 was the final score. Really big win for South Carolina, ranked number 3. South Carolina won that game 112 to 71. So quite an impressive victory against Missouri. Iowa, ranked number 9, defeated Illinois, but it was a very close game. 82 to 78 was the final score in that game. UConn remaining number 1 and undefeated, winning against Georgetown 84 to 52. So now that puts them on a 30-game win streak. Again, as we mentioned, they are undefeated. So going into this weekend, we have a few matchups that are in store. Princeton taking on Dartmouth at 5 p.m. Central Time, 6 o'clock Eastern later tonight. We've also got a couple of big matchups tomorrow that are going to be taking place. The big matchup is going to be number 14 Maryland taking on number 8 Michigan at home Michigan. That's going to be at 1:30. And then Princeton is going to have another game tomorrow against Harvard. So Princeton has back-to-back days with games here with women's basketball. Of course, going into Sunday, that's where we're going to have some of the biggest matchups of the week. We've got number 12 Duke taking on North Carolina. We've got number 4 Texas taking on Alabama, who's ranked number 24. We've also got Ohio State taking on Michigan State. Ohio State is 13, Michigan State ranked 15. All three of those games are going to be at noon Eastern on Sunday. We've also got Minnesota taking on Illinois. We've got number 3 ranked South Carolina taking on Kentucky. That game is at Kentucky at 2 o'clock Eastern. Kentucky is ranked number 16. So let's see, we've also got a couple of other matchups. We've got Baylor, number 18, taking on TCU. That game is going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. We've got OU taking on Missouri. Oklahoma is ranked number 7. Missouri is unranked. That game is going to be at 4 p.m. That's a really big rivalry, so we'll watch for that. And then the final game this weekend is going to be number 1 UConn, seeing if they can keep their undefeated streak alive. They're going to be taking on St. John's, New York. That game is going to be at 7:30 Eastern. So that's a look at some of the scores that we've had from this week in women's basketball. Now we're going to wrap things up by looking at some of the scores from men's basketball. We'll start off with a couple of big games that we had on Monday. Number 18 North Carolina in a very close game defeated Louisville 77 to 74. Kansas defeated Houston. Kansas ranked 14, Houston ranked 5. Final score in that game 69 to 56. So a huge upset with Houston, the number 5 team, being taken down. And then on Tuesday, Miami, Ohio, they continued their undefeated win streak of beating Eastern Michigan 74 to 64. We also had Duke, the number 1 team, who just completely dominated against Notre Dame. Final score in that game 100 to 56. And then Tennessee losing, ranked 22 Tennessee losing to Missouri. I was actually in attendance for that game. Very close matchup. Missouri winning that game 73 to 69. That is Missouri's second ranked team that they have defeated within the past couple of weeks. Number 2, Arizona had a close game against Baylor on Tuesday. Arizona winning 87 to 80 in that matchup, and UCF defeating ranked number 19 BYU in a big upset. 97 to 84 was the final in that game. So then we had on Wednesday a couple of other big matchups. St. John's ranked number 15 taking on UConn, number 6. UConn won 72 to 40 in that game. We also had Vanderbilt defeated Georgia 88 to 80. Vanderbilt is ranked 25. That was on Wednesday. And then yesterday we had a very big matchup. Number 8 Purdue was taken down in a very close matchup against Michigan State. Final score in that game was 76 to 74. Michigan State is ranked number 13. Of course, today we've got 2 big matchups coming up. We've got undefeated Miami, Ohio taking on Western Michigan. That game is going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we have the top 10 matchup of Michigan, ranked number 3, taking on number 10 Illinois. That game is going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And then tomorrow we've got a couple of other games that are going to be taking place that are pretty important. We've got number 11 Virginia taking on Duke at Duke. Duke is ranked number one. That's going to be at 12 o'clock Eastern time. Then we've got the ranked matchup of Texas Tech and Iowa State. Texas Tech ranked 16, Iowa State number four. That game is at 4 p.m. Eastern. And then we've got two other ranked matchups. One between, these are actually both SEC matchups. We've got number 17, Alabama taking on number 22, Tennessee at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then we've got number 20, Arkansas traveling to Florida. That game is going to be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Arkansas again is ranked 20. Florida is ranked number 7. So, and then we've got a really big matchup coming up on Monday, March 2nd at 8 p.m. Iowa State taking on Arizona. Iowa State ranked 4. Arizona is ranked 2. Well, that wraps things up on the sports report. And so that will wrap things up for our GWP weekly recap. We'll see you next week.